You're doing well. It seems to be a trend these days that I will either be finishing work or get home from work knackered after a long, hot day, wrangling children in the sun. Um, and I thought to myself, do I want to do a stream today? I should probably catch up on some of the things that have been happening. There's been a few announcements and stuff. Diane Abbott's going to be standing for Labour. There's been a few policy announcements, blah, blah, blah. Go on the BBC website just to have a little look. Oh, Nigel Farage is now leader of Reform and he's going to stand in Clacton. Wow. Um, my goodness. This is big. This was. I remember when we were looking for that Farage announcement a week or two ago, and then it turned out he wasn't going to stand. And I sort of went, "Oh, that was a bit of an anticlimax, wasn't it?" We were expecting that was the big announcement we were expecting, and I sort of said, and we'd all said, "Oh, and if Farage was leading Reform, that would put a rocket booster under Reform, and probably they'd do better in eating into the Tory vote share than they otherwise would, and all the rest of it." But oh well, it's just a hypothetical now. That's not going to happen. It's Richard Tice instead. Um, how long ago was that, Tom? Like a week and a half ago, something like
Y-
that.
Yeah, it was nearly 2 weeks ago. We said it as a hypothetical when the general election was called Wednesday 2 weeks ago, and 2 weeks later, it has now become a reality.
Have you seen the video where he announces it?
I was watching it while I was eating my dinner. I watched the whole thing live on Sky News from the moment the announcement began, from the moment it ended. And yeah, I saw it all. To be honest, I'm not surprised. When he announced that there was going to be big news, he announced it at about 10, 11 o'clock today in the morning, said emergency announcement at 4 p.m. And when he said that, there were a couple of thoughts that were going through my mind. It's either going to be these things. It's either going to be a bunch of Tories are defecting, so it's going to be a Change UK moment.
Yeah.
He's either standing for a seat or he's doing another pact with the Tories. I thought the last one was extremely unlikely, but I thought, well, I might as well include it because there's always a 0.1111% something could happen,
Can I can
even
I
if it's
add to
tiny.
can I add to that point really quickly, Tom? Because when you were listing off the possibilities of what would happen, I remember hearing something from Farage over the past week or two where he'd sort of made uh, not quite a reaching out to Sunak, but he basically, laid on the line the idea of, oh, you could do something for me, and maybe some sort of arrangement could be come to, and putting feelers out for some sort of a pact, or maybe them standing down in certain seats. I don't know what it would have entailed, but it felt like something was going on there. Um, and I wonder if what feeds into this decision, maybe Rishi totally rebuffed him on all that stuff, so he's gone, oh well, you know what? Um,
Yeah, that's something that was talked about.
what
Basically,
was it?
he said in a joking reference, he didn't really mean it, or at least he said he didn't, but he said in a joking reference that, well, if they make me ambassador to the United States, I might arrange
I
something
was,
with
I was.
Tice.
Is that what he said?
Yeah, that was basically it. He was sort of implying, well, if you make me the ambassador of America, I might be able to arrange something with Richard. But as soon as that was said, a few hours later, The Guardian put out an article in which Rishi Sunak categorically rejected any deal with Farage whatsoever. Basically, he was saying, we are going to win on our own merit. We have got a plan for this country, and we don't need to do any dodgy deals with Nigel Farage to win. That's what he said. It was a very clear rebuff of Farage, and I think that he was so insulted by that, by how clear it was and how definitive it was. And basically, it was the only definitive thing Sunak has actually done in this campaign that I think he probably thought, well, you know what? I'm going to make you and your party pay the biggest electoral price I can for that. And I'm going to stand as leader of reform and I'm going to run in a seat. How do you like that, Richie?
Do you think that when Farage first decided he wasn't going to run, perhaps he made the calculation that there wouldn't be that much chance of success for me, either in my individual seat or for the party at large. Do you think part of his considerations have been he's looked at the campaign over the past week or two and seen the fact that for all that Rishi and the Tories are doing, they're not really making up any ground on Labour, and he's actually gone, well, you know what? There could be some ground here for me to get involved and make the most of it.
I
See while the
think
sun's shining.
I think that Farage's decision were to stand as a candidate in Clacton and become Tory leader is a multifaceted
Tory
one.
leader.
Not
Oh,
Tory
getting ahead
leader.
of yourself there,
Um,
Tom.
a bit of a Freudian slip there. Reform leader is these reasons. One, I think it's pettiness against Sunak because of that rebuff that he gave him last week. But the other reasons, and I think the biggest reasons, is one, the polls are showing. On average, reform are gaining. They're going from an average of 11% to an average of 12 to 13%, with some polls putting them as high as 15%, and some of them have even got the Reform Party within margin of error of overtaking the Tories. So I think he's seen that the Tory campaign is so bad and Reform are actually gaining ground because of that, that he feels that he can capitalise upon that and continue Reform success. The other reason, also, I think, as well, is what's happened in the US recently. Donald Trump, last weekend, got convicted of 34 criminal convictions, and is due to be sentenced sometime in early July. For that. And I think that Farage has made the calculation that campaigning for and working for a convicted felon is not the smartest idea, nor is it the best of optics. So I think what he's done is he's decided to take a step back from the US campaign and has instead returned to Britain, where there is less toxicity around the group that he's campaigning for and working with. And the other thing as well, and this is the final point as well, is I think the other reason, and I think the main reason that he's done this is because I think he smells blood in the water for the Tories. I think he has seen that the 2 weeks later into the campaign, nothing has changed, as Theresa May would say. There has been no shift in the polls. Everything's getting worse for the Tories, and basically every day there is a scandal or a gaffe or some kind of electoral screw up that he basically thinks that there is a real chance that Canada 1993 can happen in this country, and that if that does happen, he can get the Reform Party merged with the Tory Party and take it over and reshape it in his own image. And I think that's the main reason why he's done this. And he admitted as much in an interview with LBC on Friday or Saturday, I
I
believe.
mean, he's always been quite open to the idea of one day rejoining the Tories and taking them over, and the Reform or UKIP or whatever party he's been leading at the time has only ever been a means to an end. That if the opportunity arose, he'd more than happily go lead the Tories and craft the party in his own image. If we're writing Nigel Farage fan fiction here. There's a lot to respond to in what you said there, Tom. I shall do in just a moment. I want to take a few comments from the chat first because we need to say hello to Bill Tycoon, who says eighth time lucky for dear old Uncle Nige. Charlie Simmons says, "What a wonderful day! Polls galore, Farage sinking the Tories, and a great stunt by the Lib Dems. Remind me later to find out what Ed Davies' latest stunt has been." Liberty Prime says, "Holy shit!" Spits out serial meme. Liebel says, "The polls don't shift without Nige." And Liberty Prime also adds, "It's simple. Farage is a member of the Tory party and is part of their zero seats campaign. As an effort to get the minimum seats possible, ex-Tory voters have to go somewhere." So Tom, pretty much what you laid out there, him looking at the polls and looking at how things have not really shifted for the Tories since the beginning of the campaign. What you mentioned about Trump as well, and that might not be as appetizing an option as it previously was. I think all of that makes good enough sense if we're guessing into what's motivated Farage into doing this. Um, I'm very excited for the consequences of Farage being back and leading reform, because because up until this point, it was one of the few sort of saving graces for Rishi Sunak in a way, that he'd called this surprise election when no one had expected him to do so. They thought it was going to be much later in the year, and many people sort of said, "Well, what's the logic behind this? Why have you done that? There's so many reasons not to do it." But one of them was, oh, it seems that they managed to catch Reform UK with their trousers down. It seems that they managed to do it with such a surprise that maybe Reform and Nige weren't quite ready and weren't quite in prime position to do what they wanted to do. So maybe he just about managed to swerve them being the biggest threat they could potentially be to the Tory vote share. At the very least, now that particular silver lining to everything doesn't seem to apply anymore, because it seems Farage is back on frontline politics. By the way, can I just say, as much as a week or two ago I had to eat humble pie and say, oh, you know what, I was wrong about Farage coming back, I would now like to retract that and say I was right all along. Because up until I was wrong when Farage changed his mind, now that he's finally U-turned, I'm right again. And I can say Farage did exactly what I thought Farage was going to do. He spent his years away-ish from frontline politics. He hosted his news show. He went on I'm a Celeb. He got his profile a bit higher. And then finally, when the time seemed right, he came back in there. As we went and thought he would. And Tice obviously ended up, as I'd said, being Farage's Medvedev, didn't he? He just did the whole
Yes.
Putin, swap out from president to prime minister and then swap back again. That's basically what Farage did. Be honorary president for a little while, and Richard Tice, you can keep the seat warm for me. And now that that's done, back in again. It's nice to be vindicated. Thank you, Farage, for coming back to frontline politics. So, Tom, what I want to do now, I appreciate that this speech from Farage about him coming back to lead the party and stand as a candidate in the election and all the rest of it, this is like 50 odd minutes long, so we're not going to watch the entire thing. Not least because you've already seen some of it, but I just want to get a feel for what was
Oh,
said earlier.
I've seen the entire thing. I can basically break down it bullet point by bullet point. It literally is basically him going, the Tory party is a disaster. They have failed in everything that they set out to achieve. The people of the country is going down the drain. The things are just getting continually worse. And he also mentioned some things about the youth as well. In particular, he mentioned that this week is the D-Day commemoration week. This Thursday, it will be 80 years since the D-Day landings happened. And basically, he mentioned something along the lines of like adults between the ages of 18 and 34, about 50% of them don't know what D-Day even is, and basically just mentions that that's yet another example of how the Tories have completely destroyed civic pride
Can
in
I
the
can I
UK.
can I just say, as an adult who is now in his early 30s, it's very nice to be grouped in with the 18-year-olds still. It's nice to feel young enough that I get put in that 18 to 34 bracket still. Makes me feel young, even though I'm not on TikTok. Um,
I'm still in the 18 to 24-year-old demographic, if only by a few months.
well, hey ho, there we are. You're fresher than me. Um,
Yes.
There's an interesting comment from Frank here, which I hadn't even thought about until he sort of laid it out there for me. Not entirely coincidence, he's standing in Douglas Carswell's former constituency. And good evening, Swiss and Tom. When I heard he was standing in Clacton, there was a little bit of me that went, Clacton, that sounds familiar, but I didn't clock. Of course, that was
I
Douglas Carswell's
predicted that
seat.
as his
Um,
seat. I said when there was that announcement going on, I said that my prediction for what was going to be the announcement was that he was going to stand as a candidate and he was going to stand in Clacton. And the reason for that is because Clacton is probably the best or second best seat in this country that Reform can win. It's Douglas Carswell's old seat. UKIP won it not only in a by-election, but they also won it in a general election. Very heavy Leave area, very Tory area, very right-wing area in Essex.
it's
So it's
it's
very
the
fertile ground for him.
Absolutely, and I think that particular points that it's the only seat in the entire country that has been won in a general election by a Farage-led party makes it that perfect sort of fertile ground for him to go for. really, because it
Yeah.
shows that it shows that enough numbers of people have been willing to vote that way in the past. So, and obviously with the razzle dazzle star power of Nigel Farage, then all the better chances there.
Yeah,
Um,
the other thing as well is it
yeah.
shows also his seriousness and commitment to this cause and path that he's now gone down. Because if he's going for Clacton, which has all of those advantages for him, then that shows that he really does want to become an MP and he really wants to make this reform campaign a success. If he was only half-hearted about it, he would have gone to some place in like Kent or Lincolnshire, which had some good demographics for him, but ultimately don't really benefit him that much. Clacton shows he's serious about this because it's the best chance he's got in the whole country to win a seat, and the odds do look very favourable for him.
Yeah, I mean, far be it from me to make a prediction this early on and preemptively, but I'm about to anyway. If I'm pushed to say, I think he might just win it. I think he might just win it. If I'm going to rate it in terms of certainty, I'd place it somewhere between. On the one hand, I'm pretty darn sure that Corbyn will win his seat as an independent. I'm less sure that Galloway will win his seat for the Workers' Party, but Farage, I'm probably all somewhere in the middle. I feel more likely than not, at the very least. I think it's certainly within touching distance for him.
There was a poll that was done at the beginning of this year in January 2024, 14th of January 2024, by Survation, which actually did a constituency poll in Clacton, basically as sort of a historical thing, because they basically went, well, this seat voted UKIP twice, so let's see if we can do a poll here. That basically did a breakdown of the parties that had Reform, Tory, Labour, etc., etc. But basically, it asked the question of if a certain MP, a certain name was the candidate, would you vote for them? And the Reform candidate was Nigel Farage. And if that election in Clacton was held back then, Farage would win it by 10%. He got 37% of the vote, and the Tories got 27%, and
And,
Labour got 24.
and can I ask how long ago was that poll, roughly?
January this year.
Things haven't got that much better for Sunak since, have they? Arguably, but yeah.
No.
Oh well. We've got some numbers backing up the idea as well. Okay, well I'm feeling more confident that Farage is going to win it now. Then, Tom, I want to play a little bit of this. Like I say, I'm not going to go in loads to it, but I feel we want to at least play lip service to. There's a big Farage announcement. Let's watch a bit of the Farage announcement. So we're going to see Tice stepping off stage, off into the long sunset. You led the party for a few years, Tice. Well done. You kept the seat warm. So we're going to see the back end of Tice talking, and then we're just going to see old Nige get on stage and see what he's got to say. Let me know if you can hear it. Oh, and before we do, I'll do a few more comments here. Let me see. You're a 30-year-old boomer Swiss. Thank you, Ben. You're at the age that 21-year-olds won't even match you on Tinder. I like that. That's the grade we're marking me against now. Clacton is Cockney overspill, isn't it? Says Davy 1602. Oh yeah, arguably, yeah. A lot of
It's in Essex. It's on the
yeah.
coast of
Essex at
Essex.
large, Essex in general. As a person who was born in and grew up in Essex, yes, there is a lot of Essex that is just Cockney overspill. People that moved out of London a generation or two ago and ended up in Essex. So yeah, for sure. Like all your cast of EastEnders, they don't actually exist in London anymore. There's no longer a bit of London that's like where EastEnders is, but they've all morphed out into Essex somewhere. Um, well, he didn't want to get too reckless like Mark did, says Lee Ball. Oh, on the ball, Lee, with the puns there. Surrey Heath Conservative selection tomorrow night includes Seb Payne, says Frank. Cameron adds enticing and bloody East Saxons. Right, let's play a little bit of this. Tom, can you hear it?
Getting people going. Why not?
Yeah, I can
We
hear
need
it.
some interest. But
All right, good. Oh,
how do we go from interest to real?
Oh
dear.
yeah, it's worth noting that when this was hosted live, it was filled with numerous glitches. The connection was really shoddy for some reason when it was filmed live.
This is the sort of thing that would have people promoting conspiracy theories that Richard Tice is some kind of a plasticine morph man.
The funny thing
What?
is that there was a moment where the connection caused the live stream to basically stop, and so what had to be done is they had to basically speed up the camera by speed two, like speed two on YouTube, in order to get it back. So at some point in the speech, if we get to it, you'll see Farage speak like double fast because of the connection being really shoddy.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing. I mean, you'd call it a bit of a gaff and a bad start, but after we had Sunak in the rain, it's hard to top that, I suppose.
Oh, by the way, just quick to
Actually,
note, Dan is in the backstage, so yeah, invite him on.
There we are. Dan! Dan. It's nice to have you here. Can I ask you one question just before we continue on with watching Farage? You recently revealed to me that you'd rejoined the Tories a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
Are you now that Nige is in charge of Reform, do you wish you joined Reform instead?
No.
Okay. Fair.
I literally went to sleep about 3:00 and I woke up about 2 minutes ago.
Oh wow. Okay, so you're fresh into this then.
All I know is that he's back as leader. I don't know anything else.
Oh, that's good. In which case, we're gonna Sorry, Tice, but you glitched too much. We're not gonna listen to you anymore. You're yesterday's man. We're gonna get straight on to Nigel here, and Dan can hear this news for the first time. I'm seeing Farage say this for the first time. There's a few of us here that this is going to be new to. Let's hope the video doesn't glitch out too much.
great stuff. Very, very good.
Great stuff.
Richard, thank you very much indeed. Now, we put out the operations notice for today under the title Emergency Election Announcement. And we did that because we think this election needs a bit of gingering up. Thus far, it is the dullest, most boring election campaign we have ever seen in our lives. And it's funny because the more the two big party leaders try to be different, the more they actually sound the same. We've reached such ridiculous levels that we saw yesterday on the Conservatives' social media, a post about the cross-channel illegal migration crisis with Starmer's got no plan. The Tories have reduced cross-channel migrants by 36%. So they've even come to lying because it's now up nearly 30% this year. Sir Keir Starmer overnight, of course, on this big issue of immigration says that they are going to cut the numbers. He, of course, the man who campaigned not just for a second referendum, but a believer in open borders and a man who was a lawyer, fought very, very hard for those that arrive on the back of lorries to get benefits once they got here.
Right, so I'll say just quickly then. Starts off with his usual Farage pizzazz. The election's been really boring. It needed gingering up. I would have said spicing up. He said gingering up. And he's gone straight away on immigration, setting out how he and Reform are different from both Labour and the Tories on immigration. The two of them aren't that serious about it. It's gone up under the Tories. Don't expect Labour to lower it. So that seems to be, I'm assuming that's going to be the key plank of the Reform UK campaign. Immigration.
Yeah, their main focus has been immigration. In particular, they've been focusing on their party broadcasts on Twitter, barbershops, Turkish barbershops, and I think also betting shops as well. But yeah, it's mainly been barbershops they've been focusing on, and basically how they believe that they're just basically being used as fronts for money laundering. That's the claim that they make anyway. That's what they say.
I hadn't up before Reform UK talking about it. I hadn't heard about that in reference to Turkish barbershops. I had heard about that in reference to both vape shops and American candy shops being apparent money laundering fronts.
I think they included them both within it as well, but Turkish barbershops was what they were focusing on in particular. Well, at least that's from what I've seen on Reform UK.
You've got to lead with the Turks because they're foreigners. That's the way to do it.
Oh yeah, I know it's a xenophobic undertone, but that's basically Reform UK's bread and butter. So.
All right. Well, let's not interrupt. Sorry, Dan. Do you want to come with anything? Or shall we continue on?
Oh yeah, just carry on. Yeah.
Okie doke.
So, frankly, we're in a situation, I think, where nobody believes a word that they say, no one's listening, people are zoned out, and right at the minute, none of the above is top of the polls by a country mile. And the problem with all this is we know whoever wins, taxes will remain high. The highest tax burden since 1948. Everyone's promising not to put taxes up, but nobody talks about reducing the tax burden. We also know that our people are getting poorer. Yes, we had growth in the economy. The last set of figures was slightly better than before. GDP, they call it. We must all bow down to the god of GDP. In fact, the more immigration we have, the better the GDP numbers are, because there are more people in the country. But what about GDP per person, per capita? It went down by almost 0.7% over the last year. So we know that taxes will stay high. We know that mass immigration will continue regardless of which party wins power. We know that people will get poorer, but we also know that crime or fear of crime will get worse. London, even the wealthier parts of London, have been transformed over the course of the last few years. Crime is so bad now that people generally don't even bother to report it. But it's okay. You can go shoplifting and nick up to 200 quid's worth of kit before anybody is even going to prosecute you. And these are all symptoms of a country that actually is in decline. We're in economic decline in relative terms. Oh, sure, we're doing better than our...
I've just found myself thinking that this really is going to be absolutely disastrous for the Tories, this happening.
It's a very, I mean, that's the thing that was very interesting about this speech, is the one word that always came to mind when I was listening to the speech was populism. It is the quintessential populist speech in every single conceivable way. That's the main word that came to mind when I was listening to it.
And I've found myself, you know, for the run of this election so far, I've been thinking in terms of, right, Rishi Sunak, what kind of red meat is he going to throw to the wavering Tory voters and the Reform voters and the people he's trying to get back on side? Like, I think today, we've had an announcement that they're going to change the Equality Act to affect who's in what toilets. Something like that, and I was like, oh right, oh yeah, they're getting on the culture wars thing there. Go on, Rishi, would you chase after them voters, whatever. But all the while, it's kind of like, you know, you've got Rishi Sunak on the one hand, who's obviously, you know, taking some of this and throwing it out there and seeing if he can rile up the base and if that's what they want. But then suddenly you hear Farage in this situation, and he's saying all of this with such a sense of conviction. I've got to imagine if I was a right-wing populist type voter and I'd be going, right, okay, I can have Rishi Sunak, leader of the Tories, who's been in power for the last 14 years, and actually a lot of the things I don't like about the country, the Tories have stood by and allowed to happen, and now they're making noises about changing it, but they're the ones who have been in charge for so long. Or I've got Nigel, Mr. Brexit, the guy that I fully believes in all the things that he's saying. Why would you go for, you know, the Diet Coke version when you've got the full fat right in front of you? That's the deliberation I'm thinking about here.
Not to mention the fact that the Conservatives, this is the problem with incumbency for such a long period of time, is that anything the Conservatives say about immigration or the culture war nonsense can easily be followed up with the question, why didn't you do this over the past 14 years?
Exactly. And that absolutely shoots any attempts that Rishi's got to kind of go, oh, I'm not, you know, all this woke, I'm going to sort out all this woke, blah, blah, blah. Straight away, Nigel and Chums can just go, well, hang on. You've been Prime Minister for how long? You guys have been in power for how long? Why is it only just now, general election time, that suddenly you're, you know, Mr. Based?
Because he's dumb.
Oh.
I will say that Rishi supported Leave in 2016 when no one knew who he was. And I think I was listening to him on that Telegraph podcast he did. And he was saying that a lot of his colleagues all view him as very right-wing amongst the Tory parliamentary party. And I do think he's quite on the right. I just think there's just this assumption of him because he's young, sort of youthful, and not a gammon, that he's not. But he is quite right-wing, and he's definitely a Thatcherite over a Majorite, and he's definitely a dry. And I think he's far more genuine saying all this right-wing stuff than Boris Johnson and Liz Truss ever was.
The question
But
I'll
the
ask,
problem
you
is
got into that. You got into that slightly, but I mean, I've heard similar things. I've heard through the grapevine people going, "Oh, Rishi is actually quite right wing relative to most of his party." I wonder if maybe it's, on the one hand, he's there as prime minister and he's trying to balance these different wings of his party, the right and the rest of them. So he's trying to cater to both of them a little bit. But why is it then that my perception of Rishi feels that so much of what he says he doesn't really believe in that much, or it's a bit disingenuous?
I was thinking about
because
this.
it basically, I was going to quickly say, my personal take on it is because it never gets followed through with anything. You can give out all this rhetoric all you want, but if you never follow through on it, people will just see it as empty rhetoric. I mean, the Rwanda policy is the most prime example of this. How long's that been going on for? What, 3 years at this stage? And there seems to be just no hope of it actually ever coming to anything at the end of the day. And this is the problem at the end of the day, is that Rishi may talk a good game, but if he never follows up with any action, it just comes across as meaningless, empty rhetoric at the end of the day. And you can't say something like, oh, but I want to do these things, but I can't because my party's stopping me, when you've got a 60, 80 seat majority in Parliament.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a huge chunk of it. And then as well, I think the fact that before he became Prime Minister, his only real public job was Chancellor, in which he did a lot of very left-wing things like furlough and eat out to help out.
Yeah.
And he was sort of seen as a very sort of big government moderate during the pandemic, as as he should have been. And had he not been Chancellor during the pandemic, and had he been, and after the pandemic, prior to him becoming Prime Minister, had he been like Liz Truss in the Foreign Office, or had he been in the Home Office before becoming PM, I think the perception would be different. I think him being Chancellor has had a big impact on how people view him.
I want to take a few comments that we've got here in the chat. Heath Starmer, our latest iteration of the Starmer in the side chat, says, "We live in a society. This country deserves a better class of politician." Makuta Pterodax says, "Galloway and Farage, the walls are closing in." Well, I don't think Galloway's Workers' Party is going to have anywhere near the same degree of effect on Labour as the Reform Party is going to have on the Tories. But nonetheless, you do now have two alternative, much harder parties of the left and right that people can vote for if they are not energised by the main two. Go on.
I just had a really quick thought that I hadn't really contemplated. Obviously, it's going to take more votes off the Tories than anyone else.
Yes.
I want to know to what extent the polling suggests he'll take votes off Labour. Because back in the day, it was quite a big chunk.
Yeah. I was just thinking this myself, right? And here's the thing: I think that obviously we've seen that Labour is recovering in the red wall that they lost in 2019, right? In those Brexit voting, working class areas that their support fell away from. But I wonder how much of their recovery in the red wall might be sort of relative to the decline of the Tories and the number of people saying they're not voting and all the rest of it. That probably aids them in that somewhat. But if you suddenly have Farage's reform coming along, then I do think that there are some voters that maybe went Tory in 2019 that used to be Labour voters that might have been looking at coming back to Starmer or just not voting at all. But actually, some of them now might get siphoned off to Reform.
There could be some people that have voted UKIP and Labour over the years, and have voted Boris in 2019, they were thinking of voting for Starmer, or like you say, not voting, that could definitely not vote Labour now and vote for Farage. But obviously that would be in mostly red wall seats, and the extent to which he'll just take votes off the Tories anyway might negate that. But he could have an impact on the overall vote share, I guess.
I think, to be honest, it will more be similar to what ended up happening with the UKIP vote in 2017, where it will have a degree of an impact in red wall seats in the north of England, but it will really hit them hard in southern England, in particular, southeast England and southwest England in particular.
Well, that's where the Tories are hoping to survive, like as a party. So
Yeah,
if that's going to hit.
I will add to my point before that as much as I was hypothesising, reforming the red wall, I'm not saying I think reform is going to take red wall areas or anything like that. I think that Labour is going to stage a comeback, the Tories are going to decline, but you will probably see a sizable enough chunk for reform in those areas as well. But I think ultimately it's going to be the Tories getting squeezed to the benefit of Labour.
Second in 2 or 3 seats.
Oh, yeah, I can name some seats where I think reform will come second. Barnsley is the one in particular that's very standout for me. That was UKIP second place in 2015, and the Brexit Party came second place there in 2019 as well. I could very easily see a situation where reform even potentially comes close to taking those seats in Barnsley. Not overall succeeding, but coming close.
I want to take a few more comments, and then we're going to do a little bit more of this video here. So, where is our hard centrist party? Says Claire King. We are just having fun while the Tories have reform and Labour have got the workers. I suppose the hard centrist party is maybe the SDP as opposed to the Lib Dems. I don't know if you've got a proper hard centrist party out there.
The SDP have gone very right wing over the past year or two.
They have. I there was a time where I toyed and flirted with the idea of joining them or proactively voting for them, but that moment has passed for me.
Yeah, these days they're not that far removed from the Reform Party, to be honest.
Well, I mean, they've got a pact with Reform, haven't they?
Oh, have they? I didn't know that.
I'd heard about some kind of a pact. I don't know if it applies to the election or whether it was back when it was local elections or whatever, but there's definitely something that they'd sorted out between them. A few more I'll do here quickly. Cameron says, do you remember when all of the Liberals like James O'Brien were praising Rishi Sunak during the pandemic? Taper E says, all the Tories had to do is resist the temptations to dismantle the NHS and boost policing with some social housing, and it would be comfy. Instead, they went full mental 3 times. A few more here. Frank says, big stuff, Chancellor, House Leader, and Defence Sec all to lose their seats. Bill Tycoon poses a very interesting question here. How many voters followed this particular progression? Liberal Democrat in 2010, UKIP in 2015, Labour in 2017, Conservative in 2019, Reform in 2024.
There's got to be a few.
I'll say that's a very big. I think that's quite a number of people. I don't know if you could put exact number on it, but I do think there is a big chunk of people who are like that, because to me that sort of voter path basically is an anti-establishment voter path. You're essentially voting for candidates who were populist or were part of some kind of anti-politics wave during those election times. Because back in 2010, it was the Lib Dems who were somewhat populist, winning over a lot of people from both Labour and Tories, people who didn't want to vote Tory, but people who were very unhappy with the direction the Labour Party had taken. UKIP was right-wing populist, anti-EU. Labour was Jeremy Corbyn, left-wing populism, and then Boris Johnson was right-wing conservative populism, and Reform is back to UKIP right-wing populism. So those sort of people are the people that would essentially go on along with populist waves, essentially. But as to how many of them exist, I don't know. It's a good chunk of people, but I just don't know.
I mean, I would, off the top of my head, I would hazard a guess that maybe it would only be counted in the tens of thousands, people who have followed that very specific progression of votes. Because as much as you can, in your mind, think about who that voter is, At the same time, I think that if you're looking at across all these elections of the last decade and a half, I think it's probably a very slim few that have actually ended up following that specific path there.
I think what you've got to think as well on this is it is a decade and a half. So someone that would have voted Lib Dem as a 40-year-old in 2010 is now going to be in their mid-50s.
Mm.
And
I mean,
would be far more willing to vote for a right-wing kill taxes party in the mid-50s.
I mean, just quickly, I want to ask you guys this. Just if we talk about the 2010 election up until present, how would you have voted? Were you old enough, or how did you vote? I'll go first. 2010, I would have voted Lib Dem if I'd been old enough. 2015, I did vote Labour, but it was kind of a holding my nose kind of thing because I was very left-wing at the time and I didn't think Miliband was that exciting. 2017, I voted Labour and I was very much fully on board with that when I did that. 2019, obviously, didn't vote for either of the main parties. I stood myself as an independent. 2024, up until recently, I've been saying I'll vote Labour, but I've been beginning to think, actually, you know what? Labour's pretty much assured to win in my seat. I might treat myself to not having to vote for Labour after all. But it will either be Labour or spoilt ballot, or I don't know. But what about you guys? What's your progression been over the years?
I'll start with myself. 2010, I was 10 years old back then, so couldn't have voted, obviously. 2015, too young as well, because I was 15. 2017, too young again. My
But
first vote in general election was 2019.
Just before your first vote, Tom, did you have a point of sort of political awareness at any of the earlier elections where you feel that you would have known how you would have voted if you'd been able to?
From 2015 onwards, I did. From 2010 onwards, no. The only thing I distinctly remember about anything political back then is that I liked Nick Clegg because he had a gold tie. That was that was the extent of my political knowledge back then. So
Okay.
yeah.
So
but
I'll
no,
take it. I'll take it from 2015. Then can you give us your hypotheticals for 15 and 17, and then your voting record onwards?
Yeah, in 2015, I probably would have voted Green. That's probably who I would have voted for back then. 2017, easy Labour. Would have voted for them. I voted Labour in 2019, and I'm probably going to vote Labour in 2024. If for no other reason other than to voice my discontent towards the Conservative government. It doesn't really matter in my seat, but I will vote for them anyway, just as a means to voice my discontent towards the government.
Fair dues, right? And Dan, and then I'll come to the chat and read out some of yours as well.
Right. So I was born in 2000, so I'd be 10 in the 2010 one. So in 2010, I'm not too sure, to be honest. I'd probably say Lib Dem or Tory had I been old enough. My sort of political awakening sort of came in 2014 when my very left-wing socialist trade union rep English teacher was annoyed that UKIP won a by-election, the first one.
Right.
And then I Googled what UKIP was and then saw Nigel Farage having a go at the EU in the EU Parliament, and that's how I got into politics. and that an MP was my teacher, my assistant teacher at secondary school, sort of around the same time as well. Well, he was a councillor then; he became an MP. So those, I sort of that's sort of how I got into politics, and so I was very anti-EU. So therefore, I definitely would have voted UKIP in 2015. Had I been old enough. In 2017, I'd have voted Tory. In 2019, I did vote Tory, and I live in a Lib Dem Tory marginal in Greater Manchester. And then this time, I'll probably vote Tory.
Okay. All right then. And I'll do a few from the chat here, just to see what some of these guys have said. So let me see. Psycho Ben says my own progression was too young, Tory, Brexit, and then most likely Reform. Claire King says 2010 Lib Dem, 2015 Lib Dem, 2017 Lib Dem, 2019 Lib Dem, and 2024 it will be Lib Dem. Shocker. Makuta Pterodax says, if I could change my votes, I'd switch from Conservative to Labour in 2017, 2019 from abstention to Labour, 2024 Labour or Workers' Party. Bill Tycoon says, all Labour except 2019 where I spoilt my ballot. Liberty says, my voting record basically involves voting for Tony Blair once, then voting anything anti-establishment since as an attempted wire-wooling of my skin. Government is the root of all evil. Likely vote for Farage this time round 2. Hate the guy, but hate the government more. And Heath Starmer says we need to get energy bills under control. If we don't deal with this now, soon little Swiss won't have a nickel for his prepaid meat. Wonderful. All right then. So I mean, we've got a bit of variety here, and I like the variety, mind you. That here we are in the stream and in the chat, and we've got a very healthy mixture of Labour types, Lib Dem types, Tory types, and even a few reform enthusiasts as well. It's nice to get sort of a finger on the pulse of how everybody feels about the current state of play. I will press on with a little bit more of this Farage video, but like I say, it goes on for the better part of an hour, so we're not going to do the whole thing, but we'll hear a little bit more from him. Or do you think we should skip towards the end and hear his summing up conclusions? Do you think that might be the better?
He doesn't really sum up any sort of conclusion. He basically gets a bunch of journalists, answers their questions, and then just leaves after he finishes answering their questions. There's not really a big stump speech at the end.
Should we do the journalist questions then? That might be quite interesting. I'll skip it ahead of it.
Well, ultimately, nice people, and I reform. I've changed my mind this time, man. But just to get something, perhaps understand.
Wow, he's been chatting to the journos for a while.
We will only recover our position through economic growth. That will only come when we get away from just half a dozen multinationals dominating the thought of our politicians and allowing real entrepreneurship to flourish. So we're very, very much on the side of the little guy and woman. We're very much on the side of creating growth. We're very much on the side of ending the poisoning of our education system, where 50% of young people don't even know what D-Day is. So make no mistake,
that's what I was talking about.
Unashamedly patriotic. We believe that it's right to put the interests of British people first. We believe Brexit needs to be implemented properly, and we are going to be the voice of opposition. And I tell you what, I've done it before. I'll do it again. I'll surprise everybody. Thank you.
So, is he actually a candidate now?
He
is the Reform candidate for Clacton. Yes,
and he's the head of the party again now as well.
Yeah, he's the leader of the party. He is doing everything a party leader would do, similar to Sunak and Starmer. And he's also a Reform candidate for Clacton's constituency in Essex.
If he wins and he goes on the Wharf path like it seems he is now, he could be the only right-wing MP outside of Northern Ireland. Unless you include West Streeting, of course, because West Streeting hates the NHS.
I'll say this very quickly. I've heard a lot in the past few months or so about the idea of, well, what if this really is the destruction of the Tory party? What if they really do get obliterated and actually a new party of the right emerges to take over from it? And I've always sort of poo-pooed the idea because I've always thought, the Tories are the great survivors of party politics. They always change themselves just enough eventually that they get back their prime position in that coalition of voters on the right. But if you do end up with an absolute wipeout scenario in this election, which certainly looks more likely now than it ever has, given this, on top of all the polling we've seen of the past 2 weeks, and you end up where you've got a rump of Tory MPs in Parliament, and actually you've got Nige as an MP in Parliament as well. And then when it comes to the time for the next election and which party of the right is going to be the one to build themselves back up versus Labour, it starts looking more possible. I'm not at this point predicting that, but I'm just saying that if the possibility was a slither, that slither's just cracked open ever so slightly,
What's particularly strange about the next Parliament is the next Parliament could be one of the strangest in British history, because you have a realistic possibility of the UK Parliament having a historic Labour majority, but in addition to that, you have the real possibility of a Parliament where Jeremy Corbyn, George Galloway, and Nigel Farage are all MPs within that Parliament, which makes it a really interesting Parliament because you've got both the representative of the left and the representative of the right, the populist left and the populist right, both in the Parliament.
You've even got it subdivided down to sort of like the populist left and the crank left both have their own figureheads in Parliament as well. You've got
Yes.
that's gonna be, it's gonna be fascinating. If that is where we end up with like a Labour supermajority Parliament, rump of the Tories, Lib Dems and the SNP possibly, toing and froing for who's going to be the third biggest. Some degree of reform presence as well, and obviously those left-wing independents or minor parties as well. That's a hell of a shake-up from what we've been used to.
There could be
Really changes things.
a lot. I was going to say there could be a lot of defections in the next Parliament, but if Starmer and Morgan McSweeney have been so grip tight on these Labour selections, yeah.
Yeah, it will be a very ideologically diverse parliament, I feel, because you will have the centre left and the centre in the form of Labour. You'll have the centre right and possibly even the hard right in the form of the Tories, depending on who becomes their leader afterwards. And then you'll have right wing populists and left wing populists included within the parliament as well as a strong Irish nationalist presence as well. Because the other interesting thing is that depending upon what happens in Northern Ireland, I know they don't take their seats, so it won't matter that much, but the symbolism is that Sinn Féin might be the largest party in Northern Ireland for the first time in history, because the DUP could possibly lose 3 seats in Northern Ireland. So
Things have been heading that way over there, haven't they? Sinn Féin's been making up a lot of ground in the last few years.
yes, they have. And a new force has also emerged in the form of the Alliance Party as well, which has sort of been sucking up a lot of ex-DUP, UUP voters as well, which has also emerged as a third force in Northern Irish politics, in addition to nationalism and unionism. So yeah, if depending on how it plays out on July 4th, this parliament could be one of the most ideologically diverse parliaments in UK history, which will make it really interesting as a parliament, in my opinion.
We've got a couple more comments. I just brought it on screen, but I'll read this one. Psycho Bennett said, I see pics of Farage from 15 years ago and he looks the same as he does now. He doesn't seem to age. Liberty Prime says, yes, Dan, 0 seats. Lee Hallam adds, a big Labour Party means a lot of disappointed people hoping for promotion and not getting it. That's certainly true. The wider the pool of backbenchers you've got, the less power of patronage you have of who you can put up into the cabinet and shadow ministerial positions and all the rest of it.
There'll be there'll be a lot of rebellions by, if Labour gets over like 450 seats, there'll be a lot of rebellions by Labour MPs on things they don't actually believe in to rebel, to try and get, they'll threaten it to try and get a PPS job or a junior ministerial job. It'd be very difficult. If I was Starmer, I'd much rather have a Blair-sized majority than like anything 50 to 100 seats bigger than that.
Well, the recent poll that came out from YouGov today, because there's been 3 polls today. 2 were MRP polls, and the other was your typical poll. All of them were very bad for the Tories.
Quick votes. Does anyone want to watch more Farage, or should we just look at the polls?
We'll look at the polls. I mean, I'm a bit biased here because I've seen the speech myself, but it really
we just know what he's going to say.
Yeah, it's your typical Farage speech. Other than the big announcements of him being a candidate for Clacton and him being the head of reform, it's your typical Farage speech. If you've seen one, you've seen them all. So,
how's Richard Tice taken this?
Well, he seems to be quite happy about it in terms of his announcement, because he gave the big sort of speech at the very start where he was like, We've done better than anybody expected. We're going up in the polls. We've got momentum. And what we need to do is we need to turbocharge this campaign into overdrive. And I announced Farage to be the leader to do that.
I've just
I
seen
mean, if we follow the line that Tice was always Farage's Medvedev in the first place, then it was only ever a temporary position, him taking charge. While Nige went off and sowed his seeds elsewhere, and then came back and took over when the time was right.
I've just seen apparently Tory aides are considering telling Sunak to change the Tory party position on the ECHR to offer a referendum.
Oh my! So you've now territory if that's the way they're going. Then
The foxes are in the hen house.
You were saying before, though, Swiss, about like the Tory party being the great survivors. I think the thing this time is when you've had, I'm not going to say like the last 14 years, but especially since the referendum, when you've had a government that has gone sort of very right-wing on the things that the general population don't want them to go right-wing on, and then left-wing on the things that like the base don't want them to go left-wing on. And by base, I don't just mean like members, I mean voters too, like Tory voters. They have sort of just gone in like the wrong direction completely. And then there's been such a lack of delivery that anything now, it just seems so last minute and rushed, and they're chucking things at the wall. You just don't believe anything they say. I mean,
I think even
tax cuts, like, it's just...
I think as well, where the Tories are really stuck now is that if they start trying to pivot even more sort of, populist right, all the rest of it, to try and sort of see off the invigorated reform threat now, then all of those sort of like all of those sort of like Tory Lib Dem battleground seats, and even a lot of Tory Labour battleground, the whole sort of the moderate centristy Tories, the Cameronite ones from way back when, and quite a lot of others as well. The people who would have voted for that kind of Tories aren't going to be voting for the Tories trying to echo reform.
Do you know what a lot of this reminds me of? Going back to a campaign that I was deeply involved in last time. This really reminds me of the 2019 Jeremy Corbyn Labour campaign. That's what it really reminds me of.
But for the
basically,
Tories.
Yeah, but for the Tories, because basically what you saw with that campaign is you saw the definition, especially towards the end, of desperation from them. You had things like the free broadband, the third off rail fares, the Waspy Woman pledge. You had all these things that came out. And what made it incredible was when it was all getting announced after the the manifesto was released. The Waspy pledge and the train fares pledge came after the manifesto was launched, and it really ruined Labour's credibility because it just came across as people thinking, oh, you're incredibly desperate if you're putting forward policies like that after your manifesto has dropped.
It's better to... I totally agree with you, and that's what inside Tory circles we've all been saying. It's becoming increasingly like the Corbyn 19 campaign. It's probably better now in hindsight for both these campaigns, looking at them, that you just try and stay credible rather than pretend you're something that you're not, or pretend with Corbyn, just try and not announce too many things. It's like the Tory announcements. It was national service, the pensions thing, and there was something else as well in the space of like 5 days. It's just too much to...
They had a policy where basically if you employed some third-party firm and that third-party firm did fly tipping, not only would they be punished, but you would also be punished as well, and it would go on your driver's license. That was the other policy they came up with.
Oh, yeah, I remember seeing that one as well.
Look, if you do it using a car and you're caught using a car to do it, I'm okay with it, but you're not actually going to catch anyone doing that.
This is the thing, and again, this is the comparison with 2019. You're taking an individual policy. Fly if you go around fly tipping, then you might get some points on your license. And we're going, oh, yeah, that sounds reasonable enough. We don't like fly tipping. If you're doing it with a car, you should get some points to the license, fair dues. This is probably quite similar to 2019 with Labour, where a load of individual policies you heard off them, you went, well, yeah, I agree with that particular thing. I agreed with a lot of particular things that Corbyn in 2019 had to say, but all of it added up to just a bit of a disorganised mess, a sludge of policies being thrown out that didn't seem credible or what have you. And with the Tories, it does seem the sheer volume of and type of policies they're throwing out.
I mean, the other thing was,
I'll read one comment quickly and then I'll come to you, Tom. Lee Hallam in the chat had said, the Tories can't win more votes. They need Starmer to throw it away to do any better. Broadly speaking, yes, I'd agree. I think the only votes that the Tories can win at the moment are undecided non-voters, basically. If there is a voter that already has it in their mind that they're going to vote Labour or Lib Dem or Reform, I don't think there's anything that the Tories can do at this point in time to actually win them back round to voting Tory before the election.
They can turn them off, though. They can turn them off even more than they have.
Yeah, that's the thing. They can turn them off and drive them towards not voting. But I think, to be honest with you, Farage has ruined the chances of the Tories winning them over. And the reason I think that is because I think that many of those don't know undecided people are the populist voters from 2015, the people who were willing to vote UKIP back then and who voted Tory in 2019 if they did vote at all. I think that's the type of voter those people are. And I think that once they see Farage with all this populist rhetoric appearing on the TV screens and espousing it, I think many of those people will go, you know what? I'm slightly right wing. I like this guy, and I think he says what he means. Unlike the Tories, who do not say what they mean, and their policies prove it. So I'm going to go to Reform. Or they'll become so demoralised at all the polls that show that Labour's going to win a majority that would make Tony Blair bluff and just decide not to vote.
I'll say this. I think that the two best moments that the Tories have had in this election campaign so far were when Farage initially said that he wasn't going to leave Reform and stand, and when Labour started to implode on Diane Abbott and candidate deselections. And notably enough, both of those were things that were outside of the Tories' power to affect. It was other people making calls that benefited the Tories one way or another. And now, I mean, Labour really did fumble with the whole Diane Abbott stuff. They ruined the better part of a week of campaigning for themselves, where they would have liked to have been talking about their own issues and policies. Instead, the distraction was, well, hang on, Starmer, is she standing? Isn't she standing? Who's being deselected, etc., etc. But that will fade and recede. I think it will be something of an ongoing issue for Labour, but I think we've hit our peak of that affecting them in the news cycle at the moment. And obviously, the other aspect of it, which was Farage not standing, that's been totally undone now. I'd say it's reasonable enough actually to say that, bar the day that Sunak called the election, this is the most pivotal day of the election campaign so far. Yeah. This has been the biggest mover, the biggest event to occur.
The turning point, if you will. Turning point UK. But yeah, basically, I think the thing with the situation with the Labour selections, I think that's been more or less resolved now because Labour's got all their candidates and all the seats they want to stand. But with the Tories, they're still well behind. I think they're only just below 100 seats they need to fill out over the next few days by Friday. And they seem to be really struggling at the moment to find people because they're so far behind where they need to be that it's really bizarre, especially as they were the ones that called the election. So you thought they would have been prepared for this with candidates, but apparently not.
CCHQ are the most incompetent individuals on the face of this planet. And nothing anyone ever says will change my mind.
What I want to do, guys, is we did bring up some of these polls on screen here earlier because they were being mentioned. So I just want to take a quick look at them. There was that. Okay, we've got two here, which I think are MRP type polls because they've got sample sizes of nearly 60,000 and 10,000 respectively. So the YouGov MRP poll, which was released just recently, field work conducted 24th of May until the 1st of June. So all of that spanning the election campaign thus far. They had Labour on 43%, the Conservatives on 25%, Lib Dems 11, Reform 10, Green 7, SNP 3, and that put Labour on an 18-point lead. And obviously, generally speaking, I think these MRP polls we place a bit more weight towards just because of the sheer increase in the sample size and the way that they go about calculating these things. So that's always interesting. The Redfield and Wilton one, that's got Labour on 46%, Tories on 20%, Reform UK on 14%, so weighing much more favourably towards Reform versus the Tories, and that's Labour with a 26-point lead. Average the two of them out, just for the sake of argument, it puts Labour in the mid-40s, the Tories in the low 20s, and with a Labour lead of the low 20s over the Tories.
It's worth noting as well that for the MRP poll, they gave a seat breakdown as well, because that's usually what the whole point of MRP polling is. It's about breaking down
not just the
seat
national
numbers.
vote share, but actually individually where the constituencies would end up.
Yeah. They broke it down in terms of who's going to win what seats where, essentially. And basically, the way that broke down was Labour would win a majority of 194, which is 24 seats bigger than what Blair got in 97. The Tories, the Labour Party would win 422 seats. The Tories would win 140, which is 27 worse than what they got in 97. And the rest of them were on different were on double-digit numbers, basically. And keep in mind that this was before the Farage announcement. And as for the Redfield poll, that was a poll that was also an improvement conducted from last week. And what that showed is the Tories had their vote share decreased in a week by 3, whereas Labour had stagnated and Reform went up by 1. And that was a bad week for Labour, and yet the Tory party went down.
I think it's in stone now with the opinion poll and other polls in the last day or so that the Tories have gone down since the elections have been called. I don't think you can dispute that anymore.
Yeah, basically, since the election has been called, rather than narrowing like people thought would happen, the polls have actually widened slightly between Labour and Conservative, which is something no one expected to happen when this was called.
And I think if we are making that assumption that a decent... Because obviously, when we look at the polls and it gives the breakdown of percentages and everything, it all adds up to approximately 100%. That's the idea, right? The people not being included within that are the people who say they don't know how they're going to vote yet. And they are, and they're not sure, and they're undecided. If what we were saying earlier about... Sorry?
They do include them. The polls in featured, these Redfield and Wilton poll, and the YouGov MRP poll, they include don't know voters. They sample them in where they're going, and this is what the result ends up being.
Sorry, right.
They squeeze them, and then
I hadn't meant MRP polls. What I was trying to say in general is when we look at opinion polling and you get an opinion poll in front of you and it says this party, this percent, that party, that percent, blah, blah, blah. What you're not seeing in those particular numbers are the people out there who aren't going to be voting yet. More often than not, the pollsters tend to lean heavily on people who have decided how they're going to vote and are pretty sure they're going to vote. It varies pollster to pollster, but
some pollsters... In fact, most pollsters actually do include the don't know votes as well as the number of people who are voting. They weigh them in a certain preference.
But I was going to say, like, when we see the report of a poll and we get the numbers, you don't then get a thing that says don't know or undecided and a percentage there underneath it. Not at least when it's shared around on, say, Twitter or whatever.
Oh, no, they do sometimes release them. They release 2 types of data. They release the data that they weigh, which is how they get the poll results.
Yeah.
And then they also release the raw data, which is what they get when they do the poll. There's 2 different types. There's the raw data, which they get from doing the actual opinion polling. And then there's the poll that's released to the public, which is what happens when it goes through their methodology.
Right. Allow me to wade through my own inaccuracy here and try to arrive at the point I was originally trying to make, which I think still stands, even if I completely ballsed up the way I was trying to get there. When we were talking before about those undecided voters and saying that some of them could well break for Reform, because they were Tory voters at one point, but they were turned off the Tories and what have you. The fact that at certain point in time, or now at least, they were in the don't know, undecided, not voting column, and now they might jump imminently to the Reform UK column. It could well be that the Tories themselves don't actually, well, I mean, they probably will lose some voters to Reform off the back of this, but let's assume that they're not actually losing any voters to Reform off the back of it. And yet, when the percentages are put out there in the polling of what percentage of people are going to be voting for who, the Tories will still be falling relative to the whole the size of the whole pie, because there are now more people moving from the undecided column to Reform. Does that make sense? I think that makes sense, even though I took a little while to get around to saying it. But basically what I'm saying is the Tory vote share relative to the total number of people voting could now fall simply because non-voters and undecideds are going to be voting Reform.
Yes.
Yeah, that does make sense.
There we
Yeah,
go.
yeah, it does.
Why?
I got there in the end.
If I've been saying this for a while, but most Tory staffers and even campaign managers and candidates, we have been so scared of Farage coming back for the past 6 to 12 months or whatever, and now it's actually happened. This is like quite a shocking day. Like this is like, this is the end kind of.
It's very similar to, in my opinion, back to the 2019 campaign when Farage said that he was not going to run Brexit Party MPs in Tory constituencies. That, for me, when that happened, was the end of the campaign. That's when I knew Labour was doomed and they were not going to come close to a hung parliament and the Tories were going to win a majority. This feels like that. This feels like the day that the election was decided in many ways, at least in terms of the outcome. I just cannot see how things get better for them. And what makes it worse is that in 2 weeks' time, postal votes go out as well. There are a lot of people who do vote by post, and there'll probably be a lot of them as well, considering the time period this has happened, with a lot of people going on holiday or booking time off work and being away from home. So, yeah, this is not good for the Tories at all. And to add more to the Tories' woes, back to that YouGov MRP poll, if there was a 1 or 2 point, just 1 or 2 point swing from the Tory party to the Reform Party, in addition to that, as Charlie Simmons has said there, if that was to happen for the sake of argument, the Tories would drop to double-digit seats. It just needs 1 or 2%.
And can you guys see that happening?
I think that's more likely than not at this stage.
Yeah.
Yeah, with Farage back on the scene, I think it's more likely than not at this stage.
We are witnessing. I firmly believe it now. I think this could be the last election that the Tory, if Starmer doesn't introduce PR, this could be the last election the Tories get above like 10 seats.
Wow, that's an extraordinary prediction. That is. I don't know if I'm quite ready to go that far, but I'll say this much at the very least. Writing was already on the wall that this was going to be a bad election for the Tories, and debate was very much over the size of the Labour majority and all the rest of it. But this moment now, with Farage back at the lead of Reform, it really is the worst case scenario for the Tories. It's hard to fathom how things could be worse for them at the moment.
We are waiting for Steiner to come and save us from the bunker in Berlin, and he's not coming. And I'm quite speechless, to be honest. I don't know what to say. I'm just sort of now realizing how grave the situation is.
What I want to do, guys, is I want to take a few comments from the chat here, and then I'll let you guys give your final thoughts, and then I'll look to wrap up the stream. So I will come back to you both in a moment. So let me see, what else have we got here? Liberty Prime just says 0 seats, 0 seats, 0 seats. No. Jack says, do you reckon the Tories will even be the second biggest party? I'm still saying that at the moment. I feel that it's more of a reach to say that they'd get that low, that they're less than the SNP or the Lib Dems. But again, if I'm going to hedge my bets ever so slightly, that possibility seems more likely now as a result of the Farage announcement than it ever would have been beforehand.
I mean,
But yeah,
this,
I'm still going to say I think the Tories would be the second largest party. That still seems reasonable.
That's shocking. Just to even think that that's a debate.
Yeah, I mean, I personally don't think it will happen myself, but I don't think it's an impossibility at this stage either. Because here's the thing, right? Is that it's going to get worse for the Tories moving forward. We have got tomorrow the debate between Sunak and Starmer, and if you've watched any PMQs or even watched last year's Tory leadership contest, you will, or 2 years ago now, sorry, you will know that Sunak is dreadful in debates. He has lost to Keir Starmer in most PMQs. He loses to Andrea Rayner in PMQs when she's up against him. He lost to Liz Truss. He lost to Penny Mordaunt. He lost to Kemi Badenoch. He never wins a debate ever because he's not good at thinking on his feet. And whenever he gets really pressed on a particular issue, he gets really testy and agitated and frustrated and begins to lose his patience
He throws a
when that
strop.
happens.
I'm not
Throws a strop.
I'm not necessarily disagreeing with the point you've made there, but I'm thinking back to 2019 where Sunak stood in for Boris in those debates, and actually back then he was sort of seen as, oh, who's this Sunak guy? He's pretty sharp.
Richard Bergen is as thick as anything, so it doesn't like. Honestly, whose bright idea was it to put Richard Bergen on the telly?
Yeah, that's the thing that has to be noted is that Sunak only came out good on top of the people back then because it was Richard Burgon, who is regarded as one of the dumbest people within the Labour Party and a terrible debater in every single conceivable way. The difference with Starmer, and this is the thing that people have to really understand, is that Starmer's job before he became an MP was a lawyer. And what do lawyers do? They think on their feet. Their whole job is literally to do just that, think on their feet when they're in a very stressful situation that can make or break a particular situation. That's what Starmer's job was for years. So he has a very key advantage in that regard. Sunak doesn't have that. He cannot think on his feet. And when he is pressed in a very stressful situation, he throws a strop and reverts back to his typical talking points. And that's really all he has. So this debate just has the chance to make things even worse for the Tories, really.
What Rishi should do is try and defend the past 14 years and the past 2 years he's been Prime Minister. That I actually think that's the best play in a debate on the television. But he won't. He'll go on the attack and talk about Corbyn and all the other nonsense, and it will make him look like a child.
That might be a good play if it weren't for the fact that at the last Tory conference, Rishi already poo-pooed over the whole record of the previous Tory government up until him, where he lumped in all the Tories with Labour and saying
he can just pretend that didn't exist.
Getting it wrong.
No, he can pretend that didn't exist. Like, it's not real.
Right, Here's me for a moment assuming that everyone needs to be held accountable to all the things I've ever said.
I mean, the good thing is probably barely anyone watched that speech at conference.
No, you're quite right. It was anoraks like us, wasn't it?
The other thing, although to be fair at the same time, if you look at what people think about the debates, most people don't want to watch it and instead basically want to watch Euros and football in general and sport in general.
The undecideds probably won't watch it. It'll probably be like party activists that watch it. The undecideds won't want to watch it.
So
I just say you know that Nige is going to have some photo ops where he's got like the St. George's England flag when the Euros are going on. And he's going to be all wrapped in it and pints down the pub with people.
Oh yeah, he'll be doing the classic pint and cigar thing that he always is quite known for doing. So he'll definitely play into that. Whereas with Sunak, it's just incredibly inauthentic. And another thing that really gives away how bad he would be in debates is just look at the way he sort of deals with things not going well with him. I mean, today, for example, there was a Lib Dem thing where they went on, where he was speaking with a bunch of people, and they went on, and there was a river behind him, and they went on a boat and drove by while the
Ah,
cameras were all there, and
I
basically, yeah, it's
actually
basically here.
I had the
You
slides up here, so
Yeah, you can see this here. Basically, here's how it goes.
Oh gosh, we're gonna keep going, right? Okay. So that's interesting. Fine. And then were you all? Actually, one of you said you weren't particularly sporty beforehand.
I was not sporty at all.
So you can pick it up.
Yeah, you can pick it. I think it's.
I'm just
actually a
waiting for
sport
the
where
the missile to come from a Type 45 to hit that.
But no, the way he responded to this was even more cringeworthy. Where he went on his Twitter and he basically said, "Typical liberal Democrats selling the country down the river."
That's a
Um,
Tony Blair line, though.
Yeah, it's
That's
a
something
Tony
Blair would
Blair
say.
line. It's something he would say. And then the other cringy thing he said was it was some sort of football analogy where he was said like it's not the Danes, the Slovenes, and all these different people in the Euros you have to be afraid of. It's socialist Starmer coming to take your money away, basically. It was just an incredibly cringeworthy thing that he said in an interview with the Sun newspaper. And then there was yesterday when he did the whole Labour plan thing and he flipped over a whiteboard piece of paper, a huge, massive white piece of paper that was blank on it, and then just walked away. And then everyone on the internet just memed that because that's what you do when you give people blank pieces of paper. And then Labour did their own spin on it where they put all the 6 pledges on it, and it was just very
I
embarrassing.
mean, Labour has no policies was a pretty good and fairly accurate meme like 2 years ago, but we've moved on from that point now.
You've just got to say that they're unfunded or that their policies are crap. You can't say they've got no policies. That is not winning you any votes. That's not inspiring your base to vote because you're just saying
it's also
they're
not
milk
true.
toast and they're no threat because they've got no policies.
Exactly. Right. Okay. There was a couple of comments I wanted to read here before. So oh dear, I've lost my place with them. It was oh shit, I've lost everyone. Okay, Liberty Prime had said, imagine how much of a win this would be if Starmer actually had a personality to fire back at the Tories, which I quite like.
Oh, there was also a new poll that came out from JLP Poll. It's linked by Bill Tycoon here.
Oh.
This is a pollster, by the way, which is very favourable to the Conservatives, and it was Labour 43, up by 3, Tories 26, down by 2, Reform no change, Liberal Democrats up by 1, and Greens down by 2, meaning that Labour's lead has gone from 12 to 17, which brings it in line with the average. And this is a pollster which is very favourable to the Tories because it weighs almost every single don't know voter and 2019 voter who is undecided in the Tories' favour. And even with doing that, you still get a 17-point lead.
Wow.
And this is again without the Nigel Farage announcement.
Okay. I want to bring us on to the final question I was going to ask you guys before we wrapped up the stream here. Final few comments. Heath Starmer says to them, the Lib Dems are just freaks like me. Look at my non-pledge card. Do I really look like a guy of a plan? I appreciate the dedication to the character here. Frank says, is Clacton just the right-wing Bristol Central now? Podge says Farage will do well in a 7-way debate. Better the Lib Dems than some turds floating by talking about. Well, that's it. It seems now that if you're a Tory and you're near a river, you're either going to get photographed next to some sewage floating in it, or photographed next to some Liberal Democrats floating in it. It's one way or the other. Maximilian Robespierre says, "Will Farage just splits the right-wing votes in Clacton?" See, the thing is, usually when we talk about vote splitting, it means that the presence of a person there splits the votes and allows the other side to get in. And I'm assuming that's what you're getting at, that Farage will come along and because of his vote splitting, Labour would end up getting in as a result. I'm not seeing that being the most likely thing. I think that probably Farage wins Clacton. I can't say I'm certain about it, but I feel that it's possible. It's quite likely even. So I'm going to say No. I'm going to say he doesn't split the right wing vote in Clacton. He obviously splits it in the sense of there will be two big lumps of right wing vote going to different parties, but I don't think it's going to be that he splits it to the detriment of allowing Labour. And I think that Farage runs in Clacton. Probably Farage wins in Clacton.
It's very similar to what happened in South Thanet, where basically he didn't split the vote there and came close to taking it. It's a similar situation there, really. No, I don't think he will. The difference with the vote splitting is that vote splitting only really applies when you're dealing with candidates who are essentially just paper candidates or bog standard party candidates. Farage is not that person at all. He's an extremely well known, high profile figure who has got one of the biggest media presences in this country, if not the biggest media presence in this country. He's not just your typical candidate for a political party, he is a very well known, standout individual. So it is a very different scenario with him in particular.
Comment here, which I think adds on to it quite nicely. More a Tory reform marginal rather than Labour coming through the middle. Another one here. The right wing vote is big enough in Clacton to not let Labour win. The MRP shows Labour on 27% there. So I think that goes to what we were saying there. Really, that although obviously having two right wing parties fighting it out, you'd imagine that would favour Labour and maybe split the votes to allow them through. I think that in the case of Farage and Clacton, it's just not going to end up that way.
If I lived there, I'd vote for him.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, I would be lying if there wasn't a temptation, because it would just be funny. It's kind of because, again, that scenario that I envisioned earlier of the ideologically diverse parliament, where you have Labour supermajority, defunct rump state Tory party, loads of Lib Dems, and then you have Corbyn, Galloway, and Farage all in the same party, or I mean parliament. It's something that would just be fascinating to watch. It would just be fascinating to see what PMQs looks like. It would be fascinating to see what MP questions look like, private members' bills, or even opposition days. It would just be fascinating to see what that parliament would look like if that was to actually happen.
Absolutely, it's like it's not that I could necessarily bring myself to vote for all of the people listed individually. I'm not sure if I could. However, given I've got the luxury of living in the constituency that I do, and I'm just watching the rest of the election unfold, I think I can say, to be honest, that I want to see Corbyn win. I want to see Farage win. I'm not sure about Galloway. I could maybe take or leave him, to be honest. But just for the sake of seeing how things pan out and looking at the most interesting possible scenarios, I kind of want to see those things happen just for how it plays into everything afterwards.
Yeah.
Right. The question I was going to ask you guys before we wrap up then, and dear people in the chat, you are more than welcome to weigh in as well. So we've had the announcement that Nigel Farage is going to be back as the leader of Reform. Reform already pre-Farage were at whereabouts do we want to say they're at in the polls? Maybe 12%, something like that, give or take, depending on the pollster. Blah blah blah. The Tories usually ending up in the low 20s or so. Do we see in the next few weeks or the run of the campaign, take your pick, that much awaited poll that has Reform ahead of the Tories? At least in one individual poll, at the very least for one poll, as the bare minimum, I would say yes, we will see that moment. What do you think?
I made a prediction when the polls were not shifting this time last week that there would be at least one poll from one polling company. I don't know who it would be, but I think there will be at least one poll which will show Reform ahead of the Tories by 1 or 2%. And if that happens in the next couple of weeks, if that happens towards the end of the election, like a week before, I think the Conservative Party at that stage will melt down and we will just see them openly infight and basically start to do a blame game where people will go, why did you call this election? Why have you done this? Our party is doomed. We're falling apart at the seams. It would basically just be Corbyn levels of infighting, but on steroids.
It's hard to disagree with that, and I think it could be very possible that not only do Reform consistently overtake the Tories in the polls by next week or the week after, that Reform get more votes than the Tories, at least in England.
Ooh. Now again, I'm going to taper my expectations ever so slightly and say I'm not going to go quite as far as saying that I think that the Reform would get more votes than the Tories when the election good and proper actually happens. But Reform ahead of the Tories in at least a handful of polls, or possibly a more consistent trend if things really do turn to worst case scenario for the Tories. Yes, I do see that happening. And as far as our poll watching goes for the next few weeks, well, for the rest of the campaign now, it is going to be. You remember when there was that meme ages back about any other Labour leader would be 20 points ahead, and everyone was hyper focused on seeing if Labour would actually end up 20 points ahead of the Tories. And then finally Liz Truss happened, and everyone went, it's finally happened. This is the new thing. It's going to be the poll coming along where Reform overtakes the Tories. That is the new thing I'm watching for.
I think we're actually at the point where after the election, it might be a break glass, get David Cameron to renounce his peerage and stand in the by-election. Honestly, I genuinely think that might be the best chance of saving the party.
Dust off David Cameron and bring it back again.
Yeah.
I mean, at this stage, I would probably go even further with that and say it's time to bring back John Major. Bring him back in the bar. Get him back in the bar.
I'm being serious.
Hey, look.
100% serious.
William Hague is pretty seasoned compared to when he was the leader of the Tories. You could always bring back Hague.
I'm being serious. I'm
genuinely. You are being serious. Yeah. Well, the thing is, I can't poo-poo that suggestion in the way that I once would have, because he's already come back to be foreign sec. You know, it's nothing. Nothing seems unthinkable these days.
He'd scare off loads of right-wing voters, but he might at least get some Lib Dem and Labour voters back. That, or I don't know. Boris might try and make a comeback, but.
It would just be very sort of funny to watch, because I sort of want to see what the activist reaction would be to a massive Labour majority. Because I remember what happened after the general election in 2019 when Labour got really badly damaged. The Labour Party just went into total meltdown, and it was infighting galore for 2 months, where everyone was called a Blairite, everyone was called a trot, everyone was called a traitor and betrayer of Corbynism and betrayer of Labour and all that sort of stuff. And
I think that started. I think that started in the last week.
It's because this is the thing. It's like it's just not going to get better. They've tried. The national service didn't work. The pension policy didn't work. The public thought that even after the Labour selection issues of the week, thought that the Tories had a bad week rather than Labour did. 55% of people thought that the Tories had a bad week, whereas only about 30% of people thought that Labour had a bad week.
I was shocked about that.
Yeah. I thought, I genuinely was beginning to think, oh wow, this has been a bad week for Labour. All this kerfuffle over their selection and Diane Abbott and the rest of it. This maybe might be that little crack of light that Rishi Sunak needs when he was hoping that Labour would mess things up and that would be his chance. Maybe that's happening, but that's gone now. That's
not
in the past.
The public thought that Rishi had a bad week, not Labour, even after all of the selection problems. So that just really shows you the nadir. And now the worst case scenario possible has happened. Farage has not only joined the fray, but he's the leader of the party, meaning he'll be in the debates. And in addition to that, he's a candidate in a parliamentary constituency with a fairly strong chance of winning it. And to add on to that, according to what Frank has said here about Reform UK claims a new member has joined the party every 5 seconds since the announcement by Farage to be leader and to stand as a parliamentary candidate in Clacton.
I can believe that they've had a booster membership this afternoon.
Look,
Certainly believe that.
so I went door knocking with Jonathan Gullis on Saturday.
As we all do from time to time. Go on.
Had I not, worked for a Tory MP for the past 2 years, or stood as a councillor for the Tories in 22 and 23, and done thousands of door knocks in the past few years, and in 2019, and basically what I'm saying is, if the threat wasn't this existential to the Tories, I'd be voting Reform. The only reason I'm backing the Tories is because I think, on the whole, at the end of the day, in the long term, it's better to save the Tories than destroy them. And I think I've just sort of got a sunk cost thing. However, if the election was a lot closer and I lived in a seat where the result was definitely going to go one way or the other, I'd definitely back Reform.
That's very interesting.
I'm just in a sort of like party survival mode now for the Tories. If I'd be happy if Farage and a few of the others win, but I can't. I'd be devastated if the Tories get below like 100 seats.
I mean, if this is what you're thinking as someone who is a committed Conservative activist who ran as a candidate who's worked for a Conservative MP, if this is what you're thinking and you're even hesitating, imagine what someone who is even 10% less dedicated than you are is thinking.
Well, can I add to this? Because we've just had and there's a lot of comments I want to read, so I hope you'll forgive me if I cut across you and read a few. But Lee Hallam has said, I have voted Conservative in every general election since 1987. I am voting Reform. This is big news because Lee, I've known Lee through him watching and talking to me on this channel pretty much since the beginning of it, within a year or so of me starting to do Captain Swiss. And he's always been a Tory. And I remember him telling me that he even voted in Tory in 1997, even though they were sort of tired and worn out and the country needed a change purely for sort of damage control, just to not have the Tories fall too far. Lee's voted Tory for the better part of 40 years, and he's voting Reform this year. That is a little. There are these little things you hear every now and then that are just little markers, just things that you take note of, and you go, that is interesting if it represents a larger trend. And Lee Hallam saying that to me is very interesting.
The doors I've knocked recently, the data is not good, and we've thought for a few weeks now that we're polling not at 25 but at 20%, and there's a lot of doors that we've knocked that vote Tory that are either voting Labour, not voting, or there's actually quite a lot less that are voting Reform, but there's a lot that the word change has come up on the doorstep a lot, and the word they're all just as bad as each other and not voting has come up a lot.
Wow.
Yeah, I've heard that as well. And I've also known people from the north of Portsmouth who have voted Conservative, who are very old, who have voted Conservative as early as 1950s level, even voted for them back then, who voted for them in every single election, including locals, who have said they're either not voting or they're even voting Reform. And there is an abnormal number of people who think that way, from what I have seen on the local news media here.
Right, guys, I've got at least a good few minutes worth of comments I want to read through, so I hope you'll allow me to do that quickly, because I will lose my place with them all. So we had a slightly recent one from God's Own Prototype, who said Tories could win if they could put away treachery long enough to offer Reform a reasonable electoral pact and stand down candidates to give them a clearer run in appropriate seats. I would agree that if that were on the cards, that probably would be one of their saving face scenarios here. I also want to say a little bit earlier on, we were talking about bringing back potential Tory leaders. We had some great comments here. We had Claire King said, bring back IDS, Ian Duncan Smith. Tofu loving Wokarati said, dig up Maggie. Bill Tycoon said, Michael Howard is only 82. Well, hey, look, if it works for Joe Biden. Lee Halleman added, Cameron coming back put reform up by 6% last year, and also asks, maybe it's Ken Clark's time. But what I really want to read here is this wonderful bit of poetry here from Liberty Prime. The world has changed. I feel it in the water. I feel it in the earth. I smell it in the air. Much that once was is lost, for none now live who remember it. It all began with the forging of the great seats. Some were given to the Scots, drunk, strongest and friendliest of all beings. Some were given to the northern lands, great miners and craftsmen of coal mines and shipyards. And most rings seats were gifted to the south, who above all else desired power. But for within these seats bound the strength and the will to govern over each constituency. But they were all of them deceived for another seat was made. In the land of Westminster, in the fires of parliaments, the Tory party forged in secret a master seat to control all others. And into this seat they poured their cruelty, their malice, and their will to dominate all life. One seat to rule them all. One by one, the free peoples of the UK fell to the power of the seat. But there were some who resisted. At last, an alliance of Labour and Reform marched against the power of the Tories, and on the very plains of the general election, they fought for the freedom of the UK. Victory was near, but the power of the seat could not be undone. It was in this moment, when all hope had faded, that Starmer, heir to Blair, took up his master's power. And Rishi, enemy of the peoples of the UK, was defeated. The seat passed to Starmer, who had this one chance to destroy evil forever, but the hearts of men are easily corrupted. And that was nicely
Beautiful.
Lord of the Rings there. So thank you very much for that. Right, what I'm going to say then, dear viewers, thank you for joining us for this, and indeed, thank you for all of your comments as well. Please do drop the stream a like if you've enjoyed it. Helps with the discovery on YouTube for getting in new viewers and all the rest of it. It has been a pivotal day, and the election will not be the same. Hell, politics may not be the same after this. I want to throw the floor back open finally to Tom and Dan if you've got any final things you want to say before we go.
I think I'm going to have a kebab to cheer myself up.
Lovely. Lovely.
As someone who has always loathed the Tories for as long as I've been politically aware, and has always wanted to see them lose a general election badly, this is a great day for me, to be honest. This is pretty much exactly what I wanted. When I heard that reform announcement, there was a wish list that I wanted to happen from it, and every single thing came true. So I am absolutely delighted by this, because this is the beginning of the end of the Tories' campaign in this election. They are not going to come back from this, and if anything, it's going to get worse because of how bad the campaign is, because of how bad Rishi Sunak is as a debater, and because there's just no way they can recapture those reform voters now that they've got the main figurehead of the right-wing populist movement leading the charge now. So I am just going to sit back with a big bucket of popcorn and watch over the next 4 weeks as the Conservative Party basically crumbles into Corbyn tier infighting, and it will be fully deserved after all they have done the past 14 years.
I'm just going to say I don't disagree with that, but as I said before, I was born in 2000, and really the only government I've known, while my mind has been politically active, has been a Tory government. And I thought losing this election was inevitable, over the past 2 years, and losing it to a sort of Blair-style majority, sort of similar to that, would be incredibly painful and just sort of a shock to the system that would be unimaginable, because we don't lose elections. But the wipeout sort of territory that we're now looking down the barrel at is scary. Like, yeah, there's no other way to put it. Yeah, not in a good place. The party is at the moment.
I think you guys have pretty much said most of what I could say anyway. I have longed to see the Tories out of power. I have longed to see them punished for the many things that they've done that I've disliked, and indeed just the sheer incompetence some of the time as well. The one thing I'd probably say is ultimately, I wouldn't want to see Reform and Farage take the place of the Tories as the main party of the right in the country, because I feel that it's a more, speaking as a person who sits on the left of politics, I think that the Tories do have the ability to moderate and taper themselves and tack to the left and adopt certain things when they feel the need to, whereas I think Farage is running on pure right-wing populism, you know. So I think long-term, that's not something personally that I'd like to see. However, I'm going to really enjoy this election. I'm going to really enjoy seeing the Tories get crushed. And we are going to have an amazing time on election night covering all of this. It is going to be the best.
I'm going to cry.
There's going to
We're all going to
be
cry.
the MRP poll, if it is to be believed, has at least 4 Portillo moments. Penny Mordaunt, Grant Shapps, David Davis, and the Northern Ireland Secretary as well, all predicted to lose their seats, and and also Jeremy Hunt as well to lose his seat as well. So we have got at least 4 to 5 Portillo moments if this MRP poll is to be believed. And always remember this. This is pre-Farage announcement, and this is what it is saying.
Well.
I know. Go on.
Last thing I want to say, Liberty Prime, who chucked a £2 super chat there, had said, it won't. Well, he managed to super chat in the end, but he basically said, the secret seat, of course, is the chairman's seat of the 1922 committee. Cast it into the fire. Great rendition, Swiss. Thank you very much for your poetry there, Liberty Prime.
Oh, by the way, I'll save this for the very end. But when you come to the very end, tell me, because there's one final statistic I'll give from that MRP poll.
We are at the end. I've been on the cusp of wrapping up the stream for.
In that case, then
forever.
I'll give the final MRP result to really drive home how bad this actually is.
Hang on, just before you do, let me bring in John Cooper and apologise to him that we're about to end the stream. Also, hello there, John.
Hello, Swiss. Sorry, I did not realise you were streaming. Otherwise, I would have joined. But at the same time, while you were streaming, I was out canvassing for the general election.
That is no problem. I want to give you my apologies that we've been on the cusp of ending the stream for the past 20, probably longer than that, minutes. And I really was getting to the end. But given that you popped up in the side, I didn't want to not give you a chance to come in anyway. So is there anything you'd like to share on your thoughts about Farage as the head of Reform? And then I was literally just going to chuck it over to Tom and Dan to give their final thoughts. Then we're going to go.
Well, I've been hearing quite a bit. I was a bit surprised because I heard yesterday he was thinking of trying to take over the Conservative Party, which he just the other day, I think, once they were crushed in defeat. But yeah, so I thought it was he was going to wait until after the election to try and take over. But if he's standing now, I wonder if that means that there'll be attempts by the Conservatives to try and block him from joining. Though, granted, I guess that depends who's in charge after the election. But I guess this depends. I don't know if Tories have the same rule that Labour has. If you run against them, you're blocked from the party for 5 years or something. But then again, Starmer's kind of broken that rule for a few of the Change UK MPs, I believe. But so there's that. But it did make me think that with the Farage running and him possibly for Reform, that probably means that the Tories are going to probably lose a few more seats just because of that Farage appeal that unfortunately some of the electorate have for him. So it means that probably the Tories will do a lot worse than they were perhaps hoping for, as I think many of them were kind of hoping that he wouldn't stand or wouldn't run, as I think he was too busy trying to help Donald Trump get elected. but now I'm hearing talks about him wanting to like run the Conservatives, but also Reform. It makes me wonder if Farage is perhaps trying to do what happened in Canada back in the 90s, where the Conservatives got a very overwhelming and crushed defeat, and then the new right-wing party that was sort of tried to replace it eventually merged with, I believe, the Progressive Conservatives to make the Conservative Party that now exists today in Canada. So I'm wondering if that means down the line we're going to get some sort of like Conservative and Reform merger, like maybe something like the Conservative and Reform Party or the Reformed Conservatives, etc. All that kind of little silly names you can make. Yeah.
I get where you're driving at. Well, what I'll say to that is, first of all, on what you say about this being bad news for the Tories and going to lose even more seats. Yep, I absolutely agree with you there, and that's very much been the theme of what we've been chatting about here today. When you say about Farage, because you're right, there had been conversations about Farage. Could he go back into the Tory fold? And here he is heading up Reform again. It seems to me that bottom line, regardless of anything else, Farage right now is playing for all of the marbles. Farage is going in. He's going full blast. He's absolutely giving it everything he can. And I think what you say about, Farage, Tories, a merger, could it be like Canada, whatever? I don't know what the ultimate outcome of that will be, but all I do know is that Farage's goal is to lead the largest party of the right in the country, ultimately, whatever path ends up being taken to get there.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, and arguably try and get into deal a partnership with apparently Donald Trump, I would also say.
Right. Anyway. I've been saying Sky Echo just said top seat is Farage standing in Clacton.
Yeah.
Farage.
So, do you want to have Tom finish with his MRP poll thing, or?
Yes, by all means. And of course, if there's anything else Dan wanted to say as well, I'm throwing it back to you guys.
Just quickly, I just got a text from a mate of mine who works for an MP and is an activist who's been on the doors all day, and he's just seen the news and he's just gone, "We're so effed. We're going to become the new Liberal Party. This is the end."
Well, to be fair, it has been 100 years since the Liberal Party did collapse, so or roughly around there.
Maybe that's just a thing that happens in British politics once a century. But the final thing I'll say to really drive home how bad this has been, Rishi Sunak's seat under the MRP poll, he was projected to get 40% of the vote. Labour was projected to get 31% of the vote, and Reform was projected to get 13% of the vote, meaning that if there was a shift of 5% of the Tory vote going to Labour, or even 10% of the Reform vote going to Labour through tactical voting, Sunak would lose his seat and become the first Prime Minister for that to happen since the very beginning of the 20th century in, I believe, 1903.
If I recall, the person that was Prime Minister at the time stood down as Prime Minister, right? It was someone else?
He had to, because he lost his seat.
I mean, he stepped down as Prime Minister the year before or something.
Maybe, I guess.
But either way, it's the closest we've had, I'd say.
Yes.
All right then. Are we good? Are we good and concluded? Do we feel for today's events?
Yeah.
Then?
No, I do wonder if Sunak does lose his seat. Does that mean that we'll have instead of a Michael Portillo moment, we'll have a Rishi Dishy moment or some sort of thing?
I think you would probably, in that scenario, you wouldn't have Michael Portillo moment anymore. You would have the Rishi Sunak moment. It would just supersede
it would coin its own moment in politics.
The Portillo moment will fade into history.
Yeah, basically, it won't be just something that appears in the UK. It would be something that would literally go around the world with absolute shock in pretty much every country in the world. People being like, "Oh my God, how badly has he done?"
Arthur Balfour lost his seat as Tory leader and Prime Minister in 1906.
Yeah.
Okay. Then Tom was right. My bad. Sorry.
So it could be like that.
Yeah. I think there was also a Labour leader that lost his seat, but I believe that was the 1931 election, which, given these current protections of the MRP poll, it seems we're getting that for the Tories, their 1931 moment.
Right, guys, I'm going to hit my big red ejector button in front
Sorry,
of me.
sorry,
and
I'm
say,
stalling
no,
you,
that's all
aren't
right.
I?
I'm going to say it's time for us to go because, in true Swiss fashion, I think we got about to the hour mark of the stream, and I said I'd wrap things up, and we've gone on for nearly another hour. So we've done well, haven't we? Anyway, thank you very much to Dan and Tom for joining, and you, John, joining us as well. And to all of you lovely people in the chat, all of your comments, as I said before, drop me a like if you haven't already. It does help. I will see you again soon. This has livened up the election, and it's going to be very, very interesting where it goes.
See you soon, Swiss. Though I'll try and keep watch on when you're doing it. Hopefully, I won't be out canvassing by the next time you decide to do a stream.
No, hey, look, you are participating in our democracy. You are out there trying to earn votes, and here I am sitting in my figurative armchair, sneering at everybody instead. But
fair enough, but yeah, I assume you'll probably be up on Wednesday, since it seems every week you've been doing a Wednesday stream.
Have I? Oh well, perhaps if that's been the trend.
Yeah, it was a week since the election. The election was called on a Wednesday, so maybe.
So I've done one every Wednesday since then. Well, I guess perhaps I will. I mean, tomorrow's the first debate between Sunak and Starmer, isn't it?
It is. It's at 9 o'clock on ITV.
Oh, that's okay. That's quite. I've got some stuff that I'm doing tomorrow evening. If I can't catch it live, maybe I'll try and talk about it afterwards, or at the very least, I'll talk about it the day after, one way or another.
To be fair, I'll probably be missing like the first 15 to 30 minutes since I'm out doing something, but who knows? I'll try and see it as well, just so I can see what they both have. But
You're back.
Yeah. I was just saying that I assume it's going to be a very boring debate, regardless.
Oh yeah, I mean I'll be watching it regardless. But yeah, so I'll say this to the viewers: you might get a stream from me sort of late tomorrow night on the head-to-head with Rishi and Starmer, or we'll just do a follow-up later in the week. But one way or another, we'll talk about the debate. Right then, that really is it. Thank you very much, guys. Catch you all later on.
Goodbye.